Hello, I'm Felicjan, your host, and today with me is Victor and Osenele, and we'll be talking about 3PLs, integrations, APIs, and webhooks. So, Victor, please introduce yourself shortly so the audience knows who you are and what's your experience.
All right, thank you, Felek. Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Ekong. I'm a principal solutions architect with Maxima. I help 3PL clients and merchants alike, rethink their integration landscape. So I help them remove the bottlenecks they have today, right, that are predominantly file-based integrations by building, state-of-the-art REST API-based integrations and webhooks as well, and a queuing strategy and system to shorten integration timelines, turnaround times, client onboarding, and integration to destination systems. So excited to be here and looking forward to our discussion, Felix. Thank you.
Osenele?
Yes.
Hey everyone, thank you for the introduction, Felix. My name is Osenele. I'm a software engineer at Maxima. I also work in 3PL, and in my role, we ensure that we build highly scalable and maintainable systems that is able to accommodate all sorts of client requests, different traffics, different load volumes, and so on and so forth. My primary goal on the team is to ensure that we're able to maintain and build systems that are very scalable. When we talk about 3PL, we're talking about logistics, we're talking about customers placing orders. It's important that these systems we build are able to accommodate loads during peak times. Say, for example, you have maybe Black Friday, whatsoever. We ensure that systems we build are able to accommodate all sorts of loads that the clients may have. And, we make sure that we keep our customers happy. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Yeah. So, you both mentioned very important things. One is file-based integrations, the other is scalable. And we know that systems that rely on manual data exchange and legacy ADI, those are not scalable. And right now everyone wants everything to be faster, cheaper, and we know that if it's human labor involved, it won't be cheaper. So I have this stat that 67% of 3PLs cite outdated tech as a major efficiency barrier, and 58% struggle with integrating new systems into legacy setups. But that's basically what you've been working on in the past, 2 or 3 years. And Victor, when you look at the architecture of our clients, what is a sign that it's a time for modernization?
That's a very interesting question, Felix, and very interesting question and study as well, because I'll take this. Let's go back in time, right? So a few decades ago, right, when you look at the logistics space and the players in this space, file-based integration wasn't necessarily a choice. It was a necessity, right? And you rightly mentioned EDI. And that was the standard of the day, right? Everything went through EDI communication, just the way we have SWIFT protocols today, that everything in banking, international transactions and stuff go through SWIFT. This was the protocol of the day. It is still that protocol, right? And if you needed to be a player in this space, be a merchant or a provider like a 3PL service, then you needed to be aligned with this, this EDI, right? And then you had messages like the 856 for ASNs, the 940 for shipment orders, and these were predominantly file-based exchange. So when you had players, right, like 3PL players and warehouse management systems, they built their systems around this file exchange because the merchant would send us these 856 or 940 messages, and these are the messages that get ingested and get processed. Now, over the years, integrations and technologies have evolved, but these integrations have not necessarily evolved, right? The customers have been demanding for faster onboarding times, faster integrations to manage systems and services, right, in the technology landscape. So there needed to be a change, an evolution as well, right, in integrations when you talk about logistics. And this is where we come in. This is where we bring our expertise to bear, right? And the system, these 3PL players at the time, right, because they needed to be aligned with the EDI format and file exchange protocol. They kind of built their entire architecture because it was easier to maintain, right? The entire architecture of the integration system, at the time, around file-based exchange. So it could be any type of file, right? It could actually be EDI messaging protocols. It could be XMLs. It could be whatever. Everything was built around this. And the thing about legacy system is, you've been in this sector for a while. It's very difficult. It's expensive to move away from legacy systems, and this is where we bring our experience to bear because we have that expertise. We understand these protocols. We understand this messaging and format, and we know what is required, right, to move from this EDI or file-based integration into APIs, webhooks.
But when is the time to move?
The time to move would yesterday, right? The time to move was yesterday. So, but don't be alarmed. If you haven't moved, I think we've got you. We've got you covered. This is why we're here. We've done these, on both sides of the aisle, right? Because it's not just the 3PL players that are in this quagmire. So we have the 3PL players, and we also have the merchants as well. So we are helping players on both sides of the aisle, right, transition and modernize their integration landscape to be more competitive in today's world, in today's technology ecosystem and landscape, right? And that is introducing APIs. And if those APIs have to, take their transactions and transform them into this API format for legacy systems to be able to consume, right, we're doing all of that. So whatever it is, and these are significantly shortened, like I mentioned in my introduction, these are significantly shortened onboarding times, integration times, not just for merchants into 3PLs with their complex and, of course, bespoke needs, right? But also to downstream source systems like order management systems, to warehouse management systems, transportation management systems. So we create a 360 integration platform, right, that it's able to bring merchants into play and also integrate 3PL players into their different internal core systems.
Okay, so Osenele, a question to you. When developing such a platform for a 3PL that is already relying on legacy tech, what's the biggest challenge from your perspective? Like, is it just the change of the technology? Is it more about change management? Is it about making sense of all the data that is all over the place? Or
that's a good question. Okay, so first of all, right, in terms of when you talk about technology, a lot of times people just emphasize on the technology part of things. They don't necessarily acknowledge that there's a human part of it. By human part of it, I mean that, say for example, right, we have this business that has been using this legacy system for a really, really long time. All their processes are built around it. But when you're then trying to introduce a new system, I think the first part of introducing a new system is getting buy-in from the business. Like I mentioned, there's a legacy system. For as long as this business has existed, all the operations have centered around the legacy system. So the first challenge is always getting the buy-in from the business. When you're trying to introduce something new, there's a tendency for them to be a lot of doubts, right? A lot of people who have been here for a long time would definitely want to push back. So the first challenge, I would say, is getting the buy-in to the new idea.
So question, is it the buy-in from the people in the management or higher, or is it more about the workers in the warehouse?
It's everyone. Getting the buy-in from everyone. I mean, at the end of the day, the management makes the final decision. But, as much as the management is making the decision, it's important that the operators in the warehouses are able to fully understand and accept the new changes that are being introduced. So the first challenge I would say is getting buy-in from the business, getting buy-in from the people. And that is the people factor I talked about. Once you're able to overcome that obstacle, you're able to build trust. It then becomes easier for you to build on that foundation. So the first stage is getting buy-in from the people. Once you get the buy-in, once you get the support, it then becomes easy for you to build systems that are able to, replace the legacy systems. Then the next part of it I'll talk about is the technological perspective. Like we've talked about, legacy systems are legacy systems, right? They can be a headache to work with, but moving away from them can be very difficult because these systems have been there for a long time. They've been tested over time, they've been shown to be reliable, but being reliable doesn't necessarily mean that it can continue to support the business. The reason why most organizations tend to move away from legacy systems in the first place is to be able to adapt to new business needs, right? So once you're able to overcome that, the human factor, the next part of it is the technological perspective. And now, moving over to the technology perspective, in my experience, some of the challenges we have faced with moving to a new technology stack in the 3PL business, first of all, I talk about integrations. Because the 3PL isn't just about integrating with external clients or integrating with carriers or merchants whatsoever. There are a lot of systems in-house that require integration. So first of all, you need to really understand the existing systems in place so that I can build a system that is able to properly replace them. So you need to gain in-depth, not high-level knowledge. You need to understand them to the very, very foundation of how they work, or else you may end up building a system that causes a lot of problems. And like I mentioned, these systems have been in place for a long time. They're reliable. So if you are bringing in something new, it has to be better than the existing system. So you need to understand the systems you're replacing. Then once you understand those systems, understand how they all interact with each other, understand the integration between them, the role each specific system plays, right? Sometimes in legacy system, you could just see some service that doesn't seem to really have any use, but the moment you take it out, all hell breaks loose and you realize that, oh my God, this system is actually required. So there's a lot of emphasis on understanding the role each system plays.
So question to both of you. When it comes to the change, is it better to do a parallel run when you develop the new system and then show people during the process how it works, how they should be using it and what will change, and then do a hard cutoff, or roll it out piece by piece? So you change one thing, you show them how it will change, then you move to the other, and then to the other.
All right. Yeah, if I can take that. So it's a hybrid model that would have to be adopted, and again, it would differ from provider to provider, right? Depending on their level of maturity when it comes to their technology stack, and the kind of architecture they run as well. Most of these legacy systems are monolith, right? Being monolith makes it difficult to kind of break them down into modular systems like you explained, where you just have a module that would do, let's say, the outbound processing, right? If we're talking about, if we're talking about fulfillment, or just the inbound processing and the different inbound transactions that it process. So if you have a monolith like that, it will be difficult to have that level of hybrid. So you have to have two systems running in parallel, right? One handling transactions for let's say select merchants, and then the other will continue to handle the vast majority of transactions from the other merchants, right? That could be a model. And if they have more maturity, right, where they then have different aspects of these monoliths. Let's say they have a monolith system, right, specifically for outbound processing, and a different one for inbound, then it's easier, right? So you can then have like a piece, right, replacing the outbound component and still add another layer of hybrid on top of it, where some hybrid transactions will go through the new system that you've architected and implemented for the client. And the whole essence of this hybrid architecture or nature, right, of transitioning is to have as minimal impact as possible on the business, right?
Because you have clients all the time, you have orders that you have to fulfill.
Which you can stop.
Yeah, exactly. Like if the system fails, then your business is in serious trouble, because all of a sudden the packages that were supposed to be shipped tomorrow are getting shipped next week, and you know how people are, and
Exactly.
you know how we are. We don't like our packages to arrive late.
Oh yeah. So and on that, I'll just piggyback on what Osea said. Or he made a salient point, right? When it comes to understanding the client, right? So we're not just a consulting firm that would just come in to implement just the technology for you and sell a system. We first and foremost, we want to understand your business, the problems that you have in your business, the bottlenecks, the challenges of your business, right? Before we even get to profiling solution and writing the first line of code. So I think the implementation itself is it's not the critical part of it. The most critical part of all of this is understanding your needs, understanding the business, right, and the nuance of that business, the bespoke nature, the customization, because each client or each merchant would have their custom and bespoke needs, which you need to cater for. So we come in first of all to understand all of those needs and then provide solutions in terms of architectures on how those needs can be met before we then begin implementation. So understanding the business is a really key point of this, and then we can advise on the nature of the transition, right? What sort of hybrid model we're going to run.
Awesome.
And something to just add to that, right? When you're building a new system, it's important to I've talked about laying the foundation, but it's also important to have a good SDLC practice, a good SDLC structure in terms of having good CI/CD systems, good quality assurance systems, and those are part of the services that we've provided. Those are part of the services that we do provide, and those are part of the things that we have introduced to these clients. So say, for example, you're launching a new feature, you're doing a new release. In our practice, we just don't release everything at once. It's important to stagger these releases, right? Say, for example, you release it to one location today, you then observe performance in that location, take feedback, add enhancements before pushing it, to the next location. So staggering those releases helps to manage the chaos associated with replacing an old system.
Perfect. And okay, when a company has that old system, it's basically monolith, but they want to move towards APIs and webhooks to really be maybe not 2030 ready, but ready for this year and the upcoming challenges that they will face. What do they have to focus on? Like, what are the first steps when you want to actually move to an API and webhook first integration?
Well, the first step, and that's an interesting question, right? The first step to a client moving into it, because again, the solutions they have to solve a problem. We don't just want to modernize the integration system, right, for the fun of it. So there needs to be a need, because this would require investment of time and resources to this particular implementation. And to that end, right, the client with us will need to, first of all, evaluate and assess the requirement, the needs of the merchant, of their end customers at the time. And of course, there's always demand, right? And the demand here is in this day and time, right, especially in this sector, time is of the essence. Speed is non-negotiable. People want to onboard as quickly as possible, right? And being able to onboard as quickly as possible would mean that some of these merchants, or most of them, will be coming from already established, e-commerce providers, right? So, and most of these e-commerce providers, of course, they are API-based integration. That is the need there. So all of these needs would have to be identified, and then we begin to roll out those integrations. Some of them would have their own, their own ecosystems and websites and apps. So they're not necessarily coming through in code traditional channels like the known e-commerce providers. For those, you would require a bespoke implementation or integration. So again, it all depends on the need, right? You won't go on to start implementing bespoke because you just don't know the nature of such integration,
And
right?
also, it's very expensive. Like that's one of the stats that I have found. Like custom integrations can exceed over $500,000 each. Like,
Absolutely.
depending on the client. Like, come on, that's $500,000 that you can spend otherwise. Come on.
No, that is completely spot on. And I want to let us just stay on that for a second, right? Because this business is customization or bespoke integration rules, right? The bigger a client is, chances are that they will have more bespoke needs and integration needs as well. And oftentimes our clients that we've worked with would have to bend over backwards to be able to accommodate some of those needs. And this is where we actually have an edge over others, right? And this is, again, why we are leaders in this space when it comes to integrating and managing such integrations. So we understand the needs and the nuance when it comes to bespoke nature of integrations, especially in the 3PL space, in the logistics space as a whole. And our integration framework, as it were, is very dynamic in nature, right? So we built a low-code rules engine that we can leverage to apply dynamic mapping, right, of dynamic enrichment of payload and mapping of data. So if certain data element needed to be enriched on the payload that is going to a destination system, and any system that actually goes through the integration middleware, we're able to leverage this custom rules engine to enrich such payload from statically configured data or from dynamic data that is actually coming from source or from any source for that matter. And what that actually affords our clients is that we can cater for a very wide range of bespoke integration needs without writing any line of code, right? Which means onboarding time would be shortened from, let's say, it would be shortened from 2 months to under 2 weeks, for instance, because you don't need to write code. All you need to do is to gather the requirement on what is required, right, for this integration to actually support client A, and then we configure the requisite rules to do that. So this is one advantage that we have in this particular space to get integration or to be able to onboard, integrating systems or merchants, relatively quickly.
Awesome. Also, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that, like I mentioned, one of the advantages of the 3PL is customizations, right? You could have a client who could come in today, they already have an established business process, an established way of managing orders and their whole inventory, but your existing system might not necessarily be able to accommodate their process. So it's important to build scalable and maintainable systems that can be easily, customized to meet the needs of these clients. I recall about a year or two ago, you had a client who was introducing a completely new product to one of our warehouses. Absolutely new product, absolutely new business process. And at some point, right, it felt like, this could be very chaotic, right, based on legacy systems that we had. But we're able to build a new system that is very, very flexible, and it was executed so perfectly and flawlessly. The client was very, very impressed. They actually didn't think that they will be able to launch that product in time for a special day, but they were able to do it, and that's because our systems, when building them, we focus on scalability and maintenance. So yeah, it's important to mention that.
So when it comes to scalability and maintenance, and 3PLs obviously, what programming language and that databases should those 3PLs be looking at right now if they want to move from legacy to new?
Okay, so I think that
or is that case by case?
Well, I think it depends, right? Because for the most part, when you're talking about languages or databases, there are a whole lot of options to pick from. The most important thing is being able to fully understand and appreciate the client's needs, right? there are different tools for different jobs. Once you're able to fully understand the client needs, fully able to appreciate what problems they are trying to solve, you are then able to pick the perfect tool, to meet their needs and to perfectly solve it. So I think it depends on a case by case basis and fully understanding the needs and the pain points of the clients.
Got it. And I will dig deeper into that. And what have you seen so far that worked well?
Okay, so far I think that, like you mentioned, right, we've been able to build a low code, very low code system that is basically a sort of rule engine. So say for example, we have a new client coming in and they have a slightly different process or their payload needs to be enriched in a certain way. This system that we've built, we've completely abstracted the low-level information in terms of the type of database they need or the type of programming language that is needed. The rules are configurable by anyone. You don't necessarily have to be a highly technical person to be able to configure it. So that's, for the bigger picture, right, being able to build that sort of abstraction over the underlying technology makes the systems very robust, very customizable. When you're able to build such abstractions, there's really no need to pay a lot of attention to the underlying technology, the underlying programming language, or the underlying database.
Okay, so sometimes it makes sense to build something simpler, but then less sophisticated, just because later down the line, it will also serve the business and you won't end up in a place where in 5 years you have to overhaul everything again and...
Exactly.
Awesome. So now question for me and other not really technical people, what's the difference between an API integration and webhooks in 3PLs? Like, can't it be solved with one, or should there always be two?
May I take that also? All right. I mean, from a technology perspective, right? APIs and webhooks, they are similar in nature. They perform similar stuff as well. Webhooks are essentially under the hood powered by APIs as well, right? Because it's still API communication between host and client systems. And the reason we've emphasized the adoption of webhooks is again down to speed and cost. Because with traditional and we support both, right? With traditional queuing system or file exchange, you need significant storage, right, to be able to support all of that. And herein comes Webhook, right, where some clients, right, and some providers as well would require speedy feedback, right, from transactions that have been processed in the warehouse as against staging this for it to be consumed. And this is where we leverage our webhooks to be able to integrate into any type of system, modern systems, right? A whole lot of providers or core systems that are being used by merchants or e-commerce providers actually have webhook capabilities to be able to consume, like the 940 messages, right? The ship confirms and the adjustment that actually happens on the warehouse floor. And this is where this is how we leverage our webhooks, right, for real-time communication back to the host system. And of course, API would just be to integrate into our system. And this is not to say that that we are only providing integration frameworks that only support APIs and webhooks, right? We also we support both synchronous and asynchronous processing or integration means, right? Again, depending on the size, the volume of the client that the client has, and of course the needs of the client. So we have systems and tools, and of course our framework is scalable, like I keep saying, to be able to support all of this. But to answer your question head on, right, the webhook itself is essentially right for real-time communication. So as the event happens in real time or near real time, we're sending that feedback to the host system, and they're able to manage their end customers, which will be you and I, right, ordering our T-shirt from our favorite store. So they're communicating in real time as against this message is being staged and batched and processed at a certain time. So that's the difference for businesses that require more real-time communication.
Okay, so basically you need both. You need
E-
both, and
Exactly.
you just have to pick where each one fits.
So it's flexible. When we come into go into a client's when we go into a client, right? This is where we then assess what they have and what they need, and we propose and build both of them, right? Because again, to business exigencies, right, there might be requirement to have more asynchronous nature of communication because the host system is incapable of processing these or communicating with webhooks. It's just predominantly file-based exchange, and this is where that would actually serve. So again, it's not like one is preferred to the other from our perspective. We just adapt and adjust to the needs, right, and the requirements and the customization required by the end customer. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just a little something to add to that, right? As much as we're talking about building new systems, APIs, and webhooks, it's also important to be able to support backward compatibility because you have clients that are used to these legacy systems, used to these file-based EDI files, XMLs integration. So as much as we're building new systems, it's important to be able to carry along customers, clients, integrations that are based on the legacy system, supporting backward compatibility. So yeah, just something to add.
That's an extremely important point. Like, you already have a client base and you don't want to turn everything upside down. So
Exactly.
guys, thank you very much. That was great. And till next time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicjan.